point to the logo on my chest and tell them, slam me, ego, slam me, ego, slam me, ego, slam me, hey. Hit it up hard, hit it with a strike. From the national anthem to the bottom of the night. Amen. Slam me, ego, slam me, ego, slam me, ego, slam me, hey. You already know what's up. What's that? Another home run. But you know the job ain't done till we hold that trophy up. Hey.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 321 of the Talking Friars podcast and YouTube show, brought to you by Gaglione Bros Cheesesteaks and Fries. We got Casey Stern on the show today, special guest. He hosts Unfiltered with Casey Stern, former host with obviously TBS. Casey, thank you so much for joining the show.
My pleasure, man. How you doing today? Okay.
Doing well. So we got a lot to discuss here. First off, we can start with AJ Preller. How would you grade AJ's offseason so far? What do you think about it now? It seems like most of his moves have been made.
Well, I think, first of all, when you start with a team, everybody wants big moves. But when you start with a team that finishes off the way that they did, there aren't gigantic moves necessarily to make. They're fine-tuning and trying to turn themselves from a playoff contender now to a championship contender. And I know they didn't win the division last year, but they certainly looked at the end of the year like a team that was going to walk into the season much more capable of doing so. Soto more comfortable, the young players stepping up. So I think, you start the back end of the bullpen, and the job that they did making sure to secure the pieces that are setting up Hader in the back end was important, because I think that one of the things we saw develop once they figured out how to use soon after he came in and he started to succeed was just how dominant that 7th, 8th, and 9th was going to be, and how important it is going to be for them moving forward. So I think that's important. Look, the Bogaerts move, was it an overpay? And I love Xander. I think most deals are an overpay. When you talk about the highest level, it's like, Aaron Judge, to me, the Yankees had to make that move. But is it an overpay at $350? Probably not, because it would have cost them a lot more. If you think about the 3, 4, 5 years even they would have had to deal with without him. Well, I think to bring in Bogaerts to do that the way that they did, I think he's great in the room. Obviously, terrific hitter. He's one of the more underrated players, I think, in all of baseball over the last number of years. And he doesn't have the pressure to carry the team the way he did really with Devers as a 1-2 in Boston. They've got a lot more pieces. Most importantly, I think having the backup plan if Manny Machado was to walk after the year was important for them to do. Clearly, Bogaerts can move over to third. You already know you got Tatis, who's going to be in the outfield, who could play short. You got Kim, who's a terrific shortstop. So to have those options and to not be stuck with, well, what if Manny doesn't come back, and to see a huge drop, I think was big for them. So I think overall, really good offseason for the Padres. They didn't need to do a ton. They brought back the team they had. They added Bogaerts in a couple of pieces. Lugo, we'll see what happens with that. I think they did a nice job.
When you talk about the effects of the Bogaerts signing, so you think that this is sort of like an insurance if Manny leaves? Or because I think you can definitely say it's an insurance. I think that they're trying to have this Bogaerts signing be just a part of their core and add that to Manny as well. Like, I think they plan on having Manny come back, and they're going to do all they can to bring Soto back. I don't know if I think there's some people, I'm not saying you are. I think I've seen some people, nationally try to say, oh, well, Manny leaves. Okay, yeah, Bogaerts. I think the Padres, they're trying to add Bogaerts to this team. They're keeping Manny. I think that's what they're thinking with this.
Well, I think it's both. I think, clearly they're trying to add him to what Manny already has built. I mean, Manny really, look, no offense to, Fernando Tatis Jr. and whatever happened with the pinworm and all of that. But, when you look at the scenario, really the franchise face for that team changed within the course of a year. It became Manny Machado, became the leader of that team. And really, I thought we saw his leadership step up more than it has at any point in his career, Baltimore, LA, or anywhere, after Tatis went down. But you have to, at the same time, I think it's both. I mean, the best moves in baseball are moves that have, more than one option. It's having versatility. And, look, Manny Machado has built himself into a more valuable player. That $300 million deal was a big deal. And people said, well, you don't want to win, and all those negative things outside of San Diego people were trying to say as if he got overpaid. Well, now you look at Manny Machado, and if he has another year that's an MVP caliber year, the way he did last year, answering all the only questions anybody ever had with Manny, which were about who he was going to be and character and things of that nature, that now seemingly have gone by the wayside, he's a more valuable player.
Right.
especially now, just to give an example, a team like the New York Mets that just lost out on Carlos Correa are going to be the first team that's going to be looking at Manny Machado to go bring him to New York to play him next to Lindor to replace it at third base, as just an example, right? And we
Right.
know the kind of money that Steve Cohen is playing with. So I think you're right, but I think it's both. And I think the best moves that are made in baseball by the smartest people always are with a backup plan. You have to have a plan B, and now the Padres have that too.
Yeah. What do you think is the Padres' biggest area of concern as of now? Like, you could point towards left field, with Tatis because the suspension, and you can't guarantee the health for Tatis. That's what we've seen as history. Maybe the back end of the rotation. That's the spots I would point to.
Yeah, look, I think the back of the rotation clearly and the depth there that they have, you want to have 7, 8 options that you trust. And, I think the Padres clearly have the big names and the horses that we know that they're going to trust in those spots at the beginning of the rotation. We saw that play out down the stretch and in the playoffs, certainly with Musgrove and Snell and company. I don't know. Look, and I've, watched in New York for years, Seth Lugo, who was a more dominant eighth inning guy with the 2-pitch mix and that curveball than he was as a starter, even though he did have some levels of success as a starter. I don't know how that's going to work out. He may be more of a depth guy who adds to the bullpen instead. I think, though, to be fair, the back end of the rotation is an issue for probably 25 teams. And
Right.
even the 5 teams that don't think it is, it's going to be at some point when they get a couple of injuries in spring training. So I think those things you can kind of figure out on the fly. I don't think that's that big of a deal. I don't look at the Padres as having many weaknesses, to be honest with you. I do think that if we're looking at questions, the biggest question is going to be where Tatis Jr. plays, how often he plays there. Do they move him around, whether it's in both corners of the outfield? Does he, play any shortstop whatsoever? And they use the DH even when they rest Xander, or is it even going to be even when Xander's, let's say, DHing to get off his legs, that it's only going to be Kim in that spot and they fully transition Tatis and he never even sees shortstop? What kind of a dynamic do we have in that room with him coming back there? Because I do think that's a question. And how motivated is he? If he's truly the level of superstar that everybody thinks that he was and hopes he still is, he's going to be angrier at himself than anybody else can be and come in motivated, and he'll go be comeback player of the year, right, in the National League. Is that the guy you get? So I agree it's the biggest question. I don't think, though, it's a weakness. I don't think the team necessarily has weaknesses. You can make the claim and say, hey, look, I don't know if they're better than the Dodgers, right? Or I don't know if they're better than the Braves or the Mets, or, they're in there, but, what's it going to take? But weaknesses, I don't see them necessarily having many. Health can be an issue for anybody. We'll find that out once we get to camp.
Do you think it's going to be a big burden on Tatis? Like, the effects on the road. We know at home, like, he's going to FanFest in a few weeks. That's going to be great, I think, for him. Maybe there'll be an idiot, wanting to boo him there, but he's going to get a good reception there in San Diego in a few weeks. I think that's good. Just welcome him back. But we know that's not going to be the case at Dodger Stadium and all that. Like, he's going to have to deal with that. Do you think there's going to be a negative effect to that, or he'll just be able to play through it and accept kind of that villain role?
I think, honestly, we're going to find out whether or not he truly is a superstar talent or whether or not he's a superstar. And there's a difference. We talk about late Kobe Bryant and, look, Michael Jordan, and, there's all kinds of different, references of whoever the guy is you think that had that Mamba mentality, which we like to use as, look, all of the best in the world, they're all blessed with talent, but there are a lot of great high level superstar talents in these different sports that never get there. They don't have the work ethic of a Tom Brady or a Kobe Bryant. If you're going to be a superstar, you have to have that. And part of that is you have to have the attitude to be able to look at yourself and not only withstand the controversies you're talking about, but to embrace it and to own it. Look, I mean, we could say whatever we want about the Astros, but for Alex Bregman to go ahead and deal with all that he has over the last couple of years and come out and play the way he has, that's a dude. Now, if that is in Fernando Tatis Jr., he's going to be the best version we've ever seen as long as he's healthy enough. But to your point, I do think that it's going to be a challenge mentally for him. And I think the guys that are in that room have to rally around him. He's still a kid. Look, we forget because we see, look at Juan Soto. I remember sitting there covering at Turner, and he's not even old enough to get a beer to celebrate the big hits when they're going to win their first series in a playoff. We forget how young Tatis Jr. is. That's why you make mistakes. We're all idiots at that age. And with no offense to anybody in their early 20s, I think now we need to see that maturity level to increase, and hopefully it does.
How about the signing of Nelson Cruz? And I think that can help this whole Tatis thing here. And because Cruz, he also got popped in his career. Having Manny around the clubhouse, and I just feels like Musgrove, Cronenworth. There's a lot of good leaders in this clubhouse for Fernando. But I do also think that some people make it seem like Fernando is like this child, and he needs all this leadership around him and all that. Like he's made some dumb decisions, but I think he knows that he has to grow up, and I think he is growing up right now. So I think, look, my point is these guys around him that can only help him, but I think he has to do it himself, right? He has to just be the grown up himself. Cruz is not going to do that for him.
Yeah, I'm with you, first of all, on Nelly, because if you look at, and he and Manny obviously have a huge relationship from in Baltimore. Yeah. Nelly was basically like his big brother. But I watched Nelson Cruz do this. You could go to even some of the people don't even bring up when he was a leader in the Seattle room and the Ketel Martes before he gets traded and becomes a star in Arizona. Minnesota, the second that he got there, I mean, this guy's revered in a room in a way like an Adrian Beltre was, like a Big Papi was. I mean, you really would like a guy like, for example, Jose Abreu was with Chicago now and will be in Houston. It's a different kind of level. But I do think, I'm partially with you. Look, I agree that Fernando Tatis Jr., this is up to him. Nobody else is going, regardless of what anybody says. But I do think every question is fair. I mean, AJ Preller basically was pretty honest, and I thought forthright at his press conference after all this happened, talking about the number of opportunities that he has blown and mistakes that he's made, how much he needs to be handheld. He's earned that. He has Fernando Tatis Jr. has earned looking like he needs to be babysat. And to your point, regardless of what or how they babysit him or watch over him or lead him, right? It's still going to be up to him. But he has earned that. That part, I wouldn't say I necessarily disagree, but I will say that he deserves all of the eyebrow raising he's going to get, all of the people who don't believe in him. And by the way, some of them will be in that room. When you are going through a season where you get 18 days that you're away from your family for all those months, and you are in the trials and tribulations of a baseball team, and that guy who you trust disappoints you and lets you down, the amount of times that he has, they're not going to come out and tell you because they can't. Nobody's going to come out and say, because of publicly what it would mean for themselves or the team, hey, we don't trust this dude. But I guarantee you there's a thread somewhere on a phone where there are players in that room that don't trust this guy. And he's going to have to earn that from his teammates.
Well, even last year, I know Clevenger's not on the team, but remember last year, those comments. I mean, we have everyone we need here. You knew that there were people in that clubhouse. And I think I agree. There are some people in that clubhouse that maybe didn't make their voices, known in the public. They
didn't say it. It doesn't mean they weren't thinking it.
Exactly. And there's going to be those same people in that clubhouse. So, yeah, he's going to have to regain that trust. And I obviously am hoping that happens. Moving back to this current team, you talked about Seth Lugo a little bit earlier. So do you think, I have the opinion that he's going to get the chance to start because he's been promised that, but I don't see him being a starting pitcher the whole year. But I don't view that as like a negative for the Padres. I think that could be a positive because he was effective with the Mets out of the bullpen. Like, whether he's a starter or a reliever, it's going to help the Padres, whatever role it is in, I think.
He's a guy who, look, I don't want to compare him because at the high end, he was not to be what a Phil Hughes or a Jabba Chamberlain was. Two guys who, I watched the Yankees kind of screw up by mixing back and forth, and that could do a lot to a pitcher's body. It is not easy to go ahead, and Seth Lugo deserves a lot of credit for how easy he's made it look to stretch out. We act like, oh, don't worry, a guy will go ahead and just throw more pitches. It's not that easy, right, for them to do. In the middle of a season, it's really not that easy. Now, it's easier to go the other way, but he's done both and gone back and forth and could be a chameleon that way. There are not a lot of guys that are that way, right? And we're not talking about be a chameleon, like go from a fifth starter to your long relief guy or your damage control, but he goes from that and then can go be your eighth inning guy and go get two righties out. And he has done that very well. So I think because of that, to your point, yeah, I don't think the Padres lied to them. I think they promised him that, hey, he's going to start. But I think he also understands that's not a guarantee that continues. He knows, hey, on this staff, we make the playoffs and go where I want to go win a World Series. I'm not getting game 3. I'm not getting game 4 of any series. But to have that guy who now adds at the back end of your bullpen, who can go ahead and could be really good against righties when you need him in a 7th, 8th inning. He's closed before if you needed him in a spot to go spell, all those sorts of things. Could pitch 2-3 innings. I've seen him do that 7, 8, 9, and just kind of end a game that is some game in August, but helps rest the rest of the bullpen. To your point, I think he's got additional value. And look, if you're trying to get to where you want to get to, if Seth Lugo makes 25, 30 starts, you're not getting there. I mean, he's got to be part of that depth in that bullpen eventually when you succeed at the highest level at the back end of the season.
I think you could say that same thing about Nick Martinez as well. And so I think a lot of Padres fans were expecting one of them to not be a starter the whole year, and the Padres will go out and get someone else at least before the trade deadline. At least for me, that's all I care about. Like we saw this past season, the regular season, you win 111 games, that means nothing. Like just get into the postseason, and if you have the right players then and you're playing well then, that's what matters. And the Dodgers weren't able to do that this past year. The Padres were before, the NLCS, and then they had to test that depth, Manaea, Clevenger, and it didn't work out very well. Let's move to Shohei Ohtani. So Bob Nightingale comes out with that report the other day. And by the way, I don't know if you saw it, but I assume you did. It was a long report. It first talks about Boris and his comments and Correa and all that. And so this note about the Padres planning to be all in on Ohtani, it's buried in this report. I think that would be like the lead to a story, make it a whole different story. So I don't know how much I want to believe this, but do you believe that the Padres would be all in on Shohei Ohtani? For me, the priority should be Manny Machado and extending Juan Soto, but I don't know how realistic extending Juan Soto is because of Boris, and it feels like they're set right now on going to free agency unless the Padres blow them out of the water.
Look, I don't think trying to figure out how to say this. I don't think this is a big story. I'll tell you why I don't think it's a big story. Depends what in on Ohtani means, right?
Right.
Any team that's got money is going to be in on Ohtani to some level. Any team, right? So that's number one. If you can afford it, and there are not many teams that can, but there are more than people think. Example, when the Padres were in trying to, give Aaron Judge $400 million, people act like, the Padres ownership just robbed the bank. It costs a lot of money to own a team, right? A lot of owners don't spend a lot of money because they want those margins to be bigger so they could save, right? Now, Steve Cohen may have a little bit more than others. I get that. But it doesn't mean the Twins can't spend money, right? Like they just found $200 million for Carlos Correa, and they hadn't done jack in the offseason to that point, right? The Padres, we know, have the bag, if you will. I think how much they're in on Ohtani will depend, as you said, on a number of factors. Number one, I think what happens with Manny Machado and what happens and what their plan is with Juan Soto, which you cannot plan and decide 14 minutes before he's a free agent because that becomes a nightmare. They're going to have to decide that as the next year develops and in tandem with Machado. If they win at a high level, it may be, let's bring these guys in with that Ohtani money and keep the team we have. But what if Soto has a bad year? What if they don't want to give him all the money? They could trade Juan Soto still with a year left on his deal and then go spend the Soto money, right, to your point, and eliminate the Boris issue on Ohtani. I do think here's the problem of why it's not as big a story. And this is just my take on Ohtani, all right? I have no idea. None of us do. But I said and have said over the last year that to me, there are two categories with Ohtani. There's the Yankees, the Mets, and the Dodgers, and then there's literally the rest of the league. And if you asked me to bet my house, I don't know if I necessarily would want to do that. But if I had to, it's in those three places because he is at a money level in terms of off the field that no player we've ever seen is at. He is a commodity off the field that no player we have ever witnessed in this sport literally has ever been at, okay? He is a star because he's different than everybody else. And it's been lost because he's not in LA. He's in Anaheim. We all know that, regardless for those who haven't lived near there. And I know your viewers do. And I've lived in LA. The 5 freeway may take an hour, but this is not LA, right? It's not.
Right.
The Dodgers, the Yankees, the Mets, because that guy, to me, is going to want to be in a place where, in addition to the $500 million deal he gets to really maximize the star quality that an Ichiro never got to because he was in Seattle. That's how I look at it. Now, I don't know that ends up being the case. Now, in addition to that, the Yankees, Mets, and the Dodgers also probably have the most money of any of the teams, right? I expect San Diego to be in. I expect the Cubs to be in and try. I expect the Texas Rangers, with the money that we've seen them throw around, to try. I expect Seattle for sure, especially with what, the ties. Absolutely, to try. Is it possible he goes to Seattle or San Diego or to sure, it's possible. But if you asked me, I think he ends up on the Yankees. I think he ends up on the Yankees. That's my own opinion. I have thought that for a long time. Even with Aaron Judge, I think he will be a Yankee. But I think it's Yankees, Mets, or Dodgers for Ohtani.
With the Yankees, wasn't there, I know that time is, things can change over time, but didn't he not want to go to New York the first time around?
I look, I've heard that, but I've talked to players over the years where they've been in these situations like, I wouldn't play for the Yankees or I wouldn't go to New York. Justin Verlander, I don't want to go to New York, right? He would never play for the Yankees. Like, it's not, if he would play for the Mets, he'd play for the Yankees, right? So it's like,
right.
And he talked about how much he loved New York. And for those who saw the press conference, lived there in an offseason with his family. But people legitimately thought, you can go back just a few months on Twitter when Verlander, we knew to be a free agent. Oh, he'd never go to the Yankees because remember, he doesn't like New York and doesn't want to be there. And we were totally wrong, right? So we have no idea what the situation is. Now, sometimes it's true. Trey Turner wants to go back to the Northeast. That was right. And that was true.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, really, I don't want to lie to you because none of us do, right?
Right.
But to me, it seems a little odd that a guy who loves baseball as much as Ohtani does, is a student of the game the way he is, has the flair for the dramatic that he does, would not think of the Yankee. And I'm not a Yankee fan. My whole family, except for me, I hate the Yankees, right? So I'm no apologist. But we could sit here, and every Padre fan watching who says they're not is lying to themselves. If we all think of baseball, we think of that cap. We think of those pinstripes. That is the representation of this sport. How can Ohtani not want to play for the Yankees? I don't understand that. I would play for the Yankees over the Mets if I was Ohtani. I don't know. I can't, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't buy that he wouldn't be a Yankee. I don't buy that.
Yeah. Now, going back to, and that's next offseason, going back to this season, you're a Mets fan. So where do you have the Mets? I know this is a Padres show, but the Padres are in this conversation. Where do you have the Mets in the National League right now? Like, where is your confidence level in this team to beat the Padres or the Dodgers or the Braves or the Phillies when it matters most? Like, do you think the Mets have improved this offseason or they've just replaced guys?
Well, look, I think on paper doesn't matter, to your point of winning 111 games for the Dodgers anyway, right? So, but that's all we can judge right now. So I always preface things like that with this. On paper is all we look at. Guys aren't in camp yet, right? There's no injuries. There's nothing else to look at except for paper. I think if the Mets had gotten Correa, I think they're the favorites to go to the World Series, if not win it. I think on paper they would deserve to be. And I think anybody who said that they wouldn't be, now it doesn't guarantee that they'd win in big game, right? So all the things you're talking about, but they would deserve to be. I believe that. I think without Correa, they're back in the same mix that they were. I think that either them or the Braves, no offense to the Philly fans, because I think because Harper's going to be out so long in this year, that's going to hurt them. It may not hurt them in the playoffs, but I think in the standings, because the Braves and Mets are going to be so good that I think it's going to be hard. So I think it's Braves and Mets again. And I think it's Dodgers and Padres again. And like the AEIOU sometimes it's sometimes Cardinals and maybe the Cubs, who to me have sleeper capability with some of the moves they've made. I don't know if they could pitch enough, but I think they're going to be way better. And if the deadline the Cubs wanted to push in that division, it may only take high 80s to win. But I think they're back in the mix. I think if they had gotten Correa, they would have been the favorites. I do. I think it's that much of a difference maker.
Yeah. Do you think that those are the 5 teams, like Phillies, Braves, Mets, Padres,
They're the
Dodgers?
Only,
that's what it seems like.
They're the
Central,
only, and the Cardinals.
I
think you have to put the Cardinals in there. Arenado stays. They've got Goldschmidt, so they got 2 MVP candidates. I think Flaherty could be a bounce back. They've got some pitching. The Contreras move was a nice move to me. And look, I love Yadier Molina. He's a Hall of Famer, but Contreras is a better offensive player by far. So that lineup's going to be scary. I think the Cardinals, you have to be fair and put in there because they're the Cardinals. They always find a way to win somehow, and we don't think they will. So to me, there's 6 teams, but I don't see literally any way whatsoever that anyone, no matter what happens during the year, surprises, injuries, deadline, it may move within the 6, right? I don't see literally any way anyone else represents the National League or even gets to an LCS. I think there are 6 teams in the NL this year, and everybody else can go home. for sure.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. All right, Casey Stern, thank you so much. Episode 321 of the Talking Friars podcast and YouTube show. That is it. I'll talk to you guys later. Go Padres.